Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little. I'm here today with the ninth episode of Weekly Poker Hand, where I'm giving you guys an in depth guide to poker. And today I wanted to show you an example of a fairly trivial fold that I don't think a lot of people would make. So, we're playing a tournament. I believe this is a $3,500 buy-in World Poker Tour event. Notice that my stack is. Let me reset this hand. My stack is around 35 big blinds. So, we have a tight aggressive player raising under the gun to 900 at 200, 400. A tight aggressive guy in middle position, actually he's on the cutoff, decides to call. And they fold around to me in the big blind. I have ace 9 of clubs. So I have to call 500 more to try to win a 9, 18 twin, probably around a 2,500 chip pot or so. So at this point, I think we pretty much have to call the ace 9 of clubs and see what develops. I don't really think folding is an option. And we flop fairly good, king 9-3. I think my only play out of position in this scenario is to check and see what develops. And whenever the player in the cutoff folds, I think I do need to call. I'm not really a big fan of folding on this board this easily. Even though I do think the under the gun guy's going to have a pretty strong hand most of the time, he could conceivably bet with something like ace queen or ace jack, trying to get his opponents to fold out a lot of stuff. So I think it's a pretty easy call on the flop. The turn brings another king, so I'm going to check again almost always. And the plan is, if the tight aggressive guy bets again, notice he bets 2,200 into a 6,500 chip pot, so he's betting very small. I think against most tight aggressive people who aren't necessarily crazy, I think this is an extraordinarily easy fold. I think my opponent's going to end up showing up with a lot of hands like a king. I think a king is the main hand he could have. And then also pairs bigger than a 9. I think a lot of players would simply check behind on the turn with ace queen, ace jack, pocket 8, 7, 6s. So I think we have a fairly easy fold. You may be looking at this and thinking, well, if he's tight aggressive, why is he betting a game of pocket queens? And I actually don't think it's that bad of a bet against the generic opponent, because a lot of players will find a call in this scenario with stuff like pocket 10s or a 9 or maybe even 8, 7, 6s, 5s, etc. because the opponent bets so small. I think if he is going to bet, this bet size is very good. Unless he's against me, because I'm going to end up making a good fold despite getting fairly good odds. You'll find that there are some players who you can always bet small against and always have them call you, but that is usually not a good style of play. Even if you're getting good odds, sometimes you're simply beat every time and you need to fold. And in this scenario, I imagine I'm beat almost every time. So no amount of odds makes this necessarily worth calling. I don't think my outs are necessarily that clean either. Say I do peel a 9, I could easily be against a king. Say I peel an ace on the river, I could also easily be against a king. So I don't really know what to do if I improve on the river. I mean, I guess I would check call, but I'd be super unhappy about it. The problem is that if I check and my opponent still bets, I may still be in a situation where I need to fold, which is pretty nasty. You definitely don't want to be in a spot where if you're drawing to improve, if you improve, you're still very unhappy with your hand. So when my opponent bets again on the turn, I think I need to fold. So you may be asking, since he did actually have pocket queens, should I consider raising on this turn? And I guess the answer is maybe. I mean, if I think he'll fold out a lot of his pocket queens and stuff like that, queens, jacks, 10s, etc., I think this would be a pretty nice spot to go for the check raise, especially if I knew him to bet larger on the turn with his very good hands and small with his marginal value hands, kind of like pocket queens on the king 9-3 king board. But I think that's pretty optimistic. I'm really not a fan of running big turn and river check raises, because notice it puts a lot of chips in the pot. And in this scenario, I'm still going to be out of position on the turn, and my opponent may just decide to hero call me. That's sort of the problem with running fairly big bluffs, is because it's very difficult to quantify how often your opponent's going to call, meaning what percentage of his range he's going to call with. And if my opponent is fairly balanced and is going to bet his entire turn range for this amount, he could easily have a king and he's just never folding, and I'm putting a lot of money in completely dead. So I definitely think I don't need to be running a bluff too often in this scenario. Although I guess it's an option. It's a pretty it's a pretty risky option. I'm all for taking a little bit of risk, but usually not in this manner. if I was in my opponent's shoes, I think I actually would have checked behind on the turn when the king comes, because there are very few scary cards you're worried about on the river, besides perhaps an ace. So if the river's not an ace, you can easily call any amount Jay Cardshark bets with whatever he has, because if he has a king, you're not really losing a big pot. And if he has value betting with a worse hand, which he might, you can easily call with the best hand. So I think my opponent, if he knew how I played and knew I would fold ace-9 on the turn, I think he butchered his hand pretty badly. Because if he just checks behind on the turn, maybe I decide to get a little bit frisky and value bet the river, or maybe I check the river with the intention of calling a bet. So I think if my opponent checks behind on the turn, on the river, if I check, if Jay Cardshark checks, he should definitely value bet fairly small at that point to try to get called almost certainly by marginal pair hands. Whenever you have a marginal hand, you usually want to make your hand look really weak. That way your hand is underrepresented. It's usually a very good idea to be either very underrepresented or very overrepresented, meaning that you want your opponent to think you have something either much stronger or much weaker than you actually have. And in this spot, with pocket queens, it's sort of right in the middle. So my opponent is betting his hand like it's a hand that's relatively in the middle, and he's pretty much turning his hand somewhat face up, either as a good hand or a middle strength hand. And how does my ace-9 do against those? The answer is just not very good. So I do find what is, I'm not going to call it a no-brainer fold, because a lot of players don't fold in this scenario, but I do think it's an extraordinarily good spot simply to get out of the way and give up the pot. Even though, you're not trying to make a middle pair and then just fold, but whenever your opponent, who is normally tight and aggressive, takes a fairly strong line, you usually just need to give them respect. And sometimes they are going to bluff you, but you're going to find that more often than not, they just have a pretty good hand. So this has been Jonathan Little for Weekly Poker Hand. Definitely check back next week at my blog, jonathanlittlepoker.com. And if you guys like this podcast, feel free to leave me a comment on the blog, or also if you get it on iTunes or YouTube, leave a positive review. That would definitely help me and help me grow the blog. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will talk to you next week.